Mage Storytime, Episode 16, Rescue Mission, Part 2, Spiders, Man. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. We didn't like being on the USS Undertaking, a ship stuck in the storm of the underworld. The promise of a ceasefire had seemed like a good deal at the time, but now that we were here, face to face with a chitinous alien monstrosity, we realized that the technocracy had screwed us good. So far, aside from being generally spooky, some spirit entity had used an image from our collective nightmares to strike at our souls. Damned anime. Given that these things could apparently prey on our mental images and fears, we couldn't be sure if this alien was real. It did seem reminiscent of a known type of acid-blooded, black carapaced, phallic-looking extraterrestrial. We spent a long time debating what exactly this thing could be as we kept our plasma guns trained on the horrible, drooling monster. Finally, Handy seized the initiative, and as he crept slightly closer, he used his magic necklace of languages to try to speak to the creature. "Are you intelligent?" he tentatively shouted from what felt like a safe distance. "That depends," the creature answered in posh English, "on your definition of intelligent." "Oh," we all said in unison. "Are you going to try to kill us?" Andy asked. "Should I?" "Please don't." "Well, okay, so long as you don't try to kill me." We were all a bit taken aback by the creature's command of the language, but when Weeb seemed astonished that such a creature could speak English so well, Charlie, for that was the alien's name, asked if Weeb thought he couldn't talk good because he was black, and refused to speak to a racist. After a bit more conversation, we discovered that Charlie was the ship's engineer. It seemed that the technocracy had diverse hiring practices. He said that they had been cruising through one of the alternate dimensions when a huge blast shook the ship. He felt the ship judder to a halt, the power flickered, and then something spectral and wailing tore through the bulkhead and on through the rest of the ship. Since then, he had been hiding and trying to repair what parts of the ship he could. He seemed to think that they had only been stuck a day or two, even though a week had passed between when we had first seen their distress ship and when we had launched this rescue mission. We started to get paranoid, and a few people began stroking their plasma guns and glancing meaningfully at the lying alien, when some of the spirit specialists spoke up. Bard and Tello both confirmed that time could flow differently in the umbral realms, so Charlie's story was at least plausible. We relaxed a little after that. Then Handy pointed out that Charlie, this horrible, drooling monster, was hiding from something else, and we unrelaxed. What in the world, or out of it, could scare something like Charlie? When we asked, he said his area had been overrun by arachnids. This disturbed Alwi and Critical, both of whom were arachnophobic. Not that the rest of us were huge fans of spiders, but those two wanted nothing to do with whatever was going on in engineering. Weeb and Bard, who had a fair bit of experience with science fiction, picked up on the vagueness of Charlie's description and realized that the situation could be even worse than what Alwi and Critical feared. They asked if Charlie meant just spiders, or if that was arachnids with a capital A. You know, as in the enemy bugs that provided the basis for so much of science fiction, from the earliest space infantrymen to the grim dark future. Charlie didn't seem to understand our distinction, but he conceded that some of the bugs had been quite large. We asked if they had guns, and he said that they might have, but he didn't get a good look. All he knew was that they weren't really literal arachnids. They were some sort of spectral infestation, basing their form on the fears of those around them. On hearing this, everyone gave Bard and Weeb shit for giving the evil nightmare ghosts ideas. Before we stormed the spider dungeon, however, Charlie offered to let us speak to the Undertaking's commander, Captain J. Luke. Charlie pulled out a communicator device that looked suspiciously like the Space Force logo. He told us their badges were the real inspiration for Trump's idea, and tapped it, calling the captain. The officer introduced himself in a dignified voice and thanked us for coming to their aid. He said he and his second officer, an android named Info, were holed up in the security office/armory 1 level above engineering. He told us that aside from Charlie, he had 2 other human, we checked, crew members somewhere on board, a Dr. Gates and a Commander Bill. We offered to clear a path through the stairwell so that everyone could come safely to the docking bay and we could get them aboard the other ship, but the captain insisted that we at least try to get his ship back in working order and pilot it safely home. When we balked at this, he also pointed out that specters and other things from the whirling maelstrom outside would keep making their way into the ship, almost as fast as we could clear them. Unless, that is, we could activate a device called the Beller field. When we laughed, the captain gruffly insisted that the technocracies had been first, and that GW were a bunch of thieves and reality deviants. Originality of names aside, this thing would act as a barrier, somewhat like a force field or somewhat like a bubble of reality, surrounding the ship and keeping things from getting in. Unfortunately, it would also keep things from getting out, and we would be stuck dealing with whatever had already infiltrated. Still, we definitely wouldn't be safe without restoring it, so we had to deal with whatever was in engineering. We sent Charlie to the rear of the party to hide, as he claimed to be a lover, not a fighter, and the party members formed into a rough firing line, our guns aimed at the door to engineering. We planned to lure the spiders into the hallway, which provided a sort of choke point, at least for the larger one, and would prevent some collateral damage to the sensitive pieces of tech and engineering. We weren't sure if the arachnids were necessarily hostile, however, as Charlie was proof that Earth pop culture wasn't always accurate. Alwee was nominated to check by his friends, as his arachnophobia would lend him speed. His brother Kitty aided that by slapping a Hello Kitty sticker on him to speed him up, while Critical manipulated chants around the brave volunteer. Meanwhile, Alwee checked that his void suit was equipped with a diaper. As the rest of us prepared to fire, Alwee snuck to the door and gently opened it with a, "Hello there." He stayed long enough to see the thousands of little spiders covering every inch of the floor, along with most of the walls and ceilings. The several dozen larger creatures were more concerning, however, and when one pointed what was clearly a gun at him, Alwee yelped and fled back to the safety of the party, screaming, "Shoot, shoot, 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 shoot!" as he dove behind the shield that Tello erected. As the swarm of thousands of spiders poured through the door and towards our little band, Weeb reached out with his forces powers and changed the air around our plasma weapons, enhancing the size of their blasts and, presumably, the damage. This turned out to be a mistake. Handy decided to do as much damage as he could to the oncoming tide of horrible bugs, and tried to overcharge his plasma pistol. This worked pretty well, or it would have if Handy hadn't held the charge too long and caused his weapon to overheat. For some reason, rather than venting energy or some such, the weapon simply exploded. The power of the blast amplified by Weeb's magic. Fortunately, most of us had heard the whine of the weapon, and we had played enough video games to be in mid-dodge when the gun exploded, so Handy was the only one to take much damage. It was at that point that Handy was banned from using firearms. He would have to stick to bows and arrows from now on. We picked ourselves up off the ground with a few muttered curses and returned our attention to the pressing matter of the swarm of spiders. On the plus side, the swarm was large enough that, so long as we didn't do anything dumb like Handy, we only had to be able to hit the floor. We may not all be the best marksmen, but we could manage that. On the negative side, our blast didn't seem to be having much effect. Even though every shot landed, the few spiders killed in each volley were a drop in the ocean of the larger swarm. Even Critical's magical D20 did little to bother the horde. Tello was able to keep the tide at bay somewhat with the spirits of parasitic wasps that she summoned into the ship, but we still had to give ground as the spiders kept coming. To add to our difficulties, by this point several of the larger sci-fi arachnids had appeared in the doorway and aimed their weapons at us. Alwee saw them and fired first, planting a glowing ball of plasma directly on the center of one's head. It gave the arachnid equivalent of a blank stare, then started returning fire. Alwee started to freak out at the invincible monsters, until he realized that his weapon was set to stun. A quick check discovered that no one else even had a stun setting on their weapons. Apparently the technocracy had thoughts regarding Alwee's competence. We all took cover from the shots as best we could, while Charlie helpfully informed us that the guns were new. We were right about them changing based on our fears and mental images. Fortunately, the arachnids seemed to be shooting something akin to regular bullets. Weeb claimed that if they were firing streams of devouring beetles, he was going to tear a hole in the hull and take his chances with the spirit storm outside. Inspired by Weeb's plans to run away, Handy had an idea. We weren't exactly in outer space, but Charlie and the captain had both said that the outside environment essentially acted the same, inasmuch as it was inimical to living things. So he figured that a hole in the craft might have the same effect. He started chalking a sigil on the metal floor of the spaceship, and used his correspondence magic to cast it onto the wall on the far side of the engineering room, which he could just see through the open doorway. At a cry from Handy, a hole opened up in the back wall of the engineering room. There was enough pressure difference to cause a huge wind to start sucking. We were far enough away not to be affected very much, and within a few seconds 90% of the swarm of little spiders were gone, along with all but a few of the larger ones. We weren't sure if that would kill them, or even if spectral spiders could be killed, but it got them off the ship and made them officially not our problem. Unfortunately, one of the big arachnids got stuck in the hole, plugging it, but Handy took care of that one too. When he dropped his magical spell, the hole immediately snapped shut, cutting the arachnid in two. We all cheered Handy's success, but we said he still wasn't allowed to carry guns anymore. Despite the massive damage that had been done to their reserves, the remnants of the spider swarm were still getting too close for comfort. Seeing this, Weeb started using his martial arts to channel his forces abilities, gathering the plasma energy left hanging in the air from our shots and Handy's exploding gun, and twisting, or bending, the concentrated energy into a ring around the hallway. He created a small barrier, about the size of a door jamb or lintel, all around the hallway's walls and floors. This did an excellent job of frying most of the swarming arachnids as they charged straight into the concentrated plasma, allowing us to focus fire on the big ones. The battle didn't last long after that. Despite Handy's mishap, we were all at least semi-competent around firearms. Hell, most of us were native Texans, and we had all gone shooting before. The bugs, on the other hand, seemed to have trouble reconciling the weapons with their forms. Or maybe space bugs are just kind of dumb. As the swarm burned itself out on Weeb's barrier, and most of the big bugs took hits from our plasma pistols, Tello pulled a tarot card and used it to summon that which a large spider feared most. A gigantic boot dropped from the ceiling, crunching one of the arachnids. Then, Kitty slapped an enchanted sticker portraying an anime cat on Bard, causing him to bulk up massively. As the normally timid Mind Mage split his armor at the seams with his new muscles, he was a little disappointed not to turn green. Still, he channeled one of his comic book deities, shouted, "Bard smash!" and charged down the hallway, where he pounded the last of the arachnids into paste. Once the insectoid screaming had stopped, we gathered up Charlie and carefully moved to the engineering room. While Weeb set about healing the party with magical acupressure, and a deflated Bard got himself a new void suit, the alien engineer started working on the bizarre machinery. Within a few minutes he had restored main power, and the place was no longer lit like a horror film. Having working lights doesn't seem important until you don't have them. We didn't leave, though, until he had gotten the Beller field up and running. We didn't want to have to clear out any areas twice, thank you very much. We spent the next few hours resting from our wounds, serving as manual labor for Charlie, and avoiding the captain's calls. He had been fine for weeks, by our reckoning anyway, not necessarily by his, so a few more hours wouldn't kill him. Probably. When Charlie had gotten the ship's defenses working again, we regrouped at the door to the second floor. The engineering room was large enough to take up 2 floors. We told Charlie we would send any crew we found to engineering to give him a hand, or at least stay together where we knew it was safe. It didn't take us long to run into the first crew member. The closest door opening off of the now well-lit corridor turned out to be the medical bay. We stepped in and were greeted by a red-haired woman in greenish-blue lab coat. She seemed startled to see us and asked who we were. When we said we were a rescue party sent to save them, Dr. Gates, as our name tag identified her, seemed relieved. "And you'll get me, all of us, out of this place? And back to the lands of the living?" "Well," Tello said, "that depends on how damaged the engine is, and what Charlie can do with it. But our current plan is to fix this ship and use it to take you home. For now, you can help Charlie out in engineering." "Oh, Charlie. Of course. Yes, of course I'll help him." With that, she started to walk towards the fore of the ship, claiming she had gotten a bit turned around by the power outage and everything else when we pointed out that she was going in the wrong direction. As soon as the door closed and she was out of earshot, the party huddled together and asked if she had seemed weird. A quick mind/spirit check by Bard indicated that the doctor was, in fact, possessed by something else. We were debating what to do about it, and whether or not we should warn Charlie, when a high-pitched scream came from engineering. When we ran back into the engineering room, we saw a shrieking Charlie huddling in the corner of the floor below us as the possessed Dr. Gates advanced on him with a whirring bone saw. We saw little hissing puddles of acidic blood spattering the floor from where the alien engineer had already been wounded. We decided we weren't going to screw around with any possession, so Tello summoned a bunch of vicious spirits, commanding them to take the form of snakes, which entwined themselves around the doctor and held her fast. As the doctor struggled in her bonds, we separated her from the terrified engineer and began pondering how to exorcise her. Several ideas were suggested, such as teaching the demon pain, burning the doctor as a witch, or simply using some of the party's raw spirit magic to mystically force the thing out. Ultimately, Weeb decided to intimidate the possessing entity. Kitty stuck an animated tiger sticker on him to increase his presence, and Weeb started to pump forces magic through his body, causing his eyes to literally spark and his hair to stand on end. Taking a dramatic pose, he pondered, "I wonder what happens to a ghost in the spirit world that gets torn apart bit by bit. Do they actually die here? I wonder how much pain they can experience before that happens." It was a pretty impressive display, and it was backed up by a pulse of Bard's spirit magic. Still, the possessing creature was stubborn and refused to give up its host. Until Kitty forced the matter. He pulled a sticker portraying a pair of animated Siamese cats and slapped it on the doctor's forehead, causing the two personalities inside the doctor to split apart. A very surprised spirit found itself physically forced out of the doctor's body, where Weeb hit it with a lightning punch, blasting it into the spiritual equivalent of atoms. Weeb then noted the effectiveness of lightning as an exorcism strategy for later use. The doctor was surprised to see us, apparently having no memory of the time she had been possessed. The last she remembered was alarms as the ship was rocked by some sort of blast, which we presumed to be the bomb/spirit quake, and then she woke up in engineering. We let her up, and she immediately set about patching up the wounded Charlie. He was a little hesitant at first, but quickly realized she was back to herself. We calmed the captain and told him all about the possession and rescue of the doctor. He said that he and his second officer, Mr. Info, were both fine, but his other officer might be in danger of being taken over. And said officer was, as far as the captain knew, on the bridge. It seemed we didn't have much time to mess around, so we rearmed and formed up to explore the second level of the haunted ship undertaking. What horrors still await our heroes? Will they reach the crew before they are possessed? Will they escape the maelstrom? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.